Okay, welcome Jen Blatz with the UX playbook of the beastly stakeholders of product. Go, go, go.
All right, thank you so much, Debbie. Hello, everyone. I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Jen Blatz, and today we are going to talk about stakeholders. So let's level set and define a stakeholder. And that is basically somebody who has a stake in the game when it comes to the things that we are building or improving. Well, as if we ever really get a chance to put out that new mythical improved version 2, right? I'm sure there's some people here who know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Version 2. Ugh. Anyway, we are going to be visiting some very interesting specimens in the animal kingdom today, and I call them beastly stakeholders. And I want to use the politically correct term to describe what I think many of us UX pros can relate to, and that is challenges. Well, you know what? I honestly hate that word. Why don't we call challenges what they really are? They're jerks, a pain in the ass, hard to deal with, inconsiderate. All right, but I'm going to keep things nice for now. And challenges are inevitable in any profession. But, in UX, sometimes it feels like we're up against some really tough beasts. And these beasts that I'm going to talk about today are our stakeholders. So I'm going to give you a mini playbook on how to wrangle 5 beastly challenges, also known as stakeholders, that we may come across in our professional safaris. So let's be honest, these beasts are some of the biggest challenges that we face in our work. This is the stuff they never told you about when you got into UX, how you're going to have to deal with everyone else who challenges you along the way. As UX folks, we just want to conduct user research, or we just want to understand and empathize with our users so that we can make better products. We just want to design simple and intuitive interfaces, right? But, we can't go this safari alone. So I'm going to share some solutions that can help us tame these beasts and make our workplace better for us UX pros and for our stakeholders. And sometimes, stakeholders, whether they mean to or not, like I said, they make our work difficult. And I'm going to apologize now if some of the things that I talk about today that you personally take offense to. I'm going to say sorry if there are any product owners, product managers, developers, marketing folks, sales folks, whoever else we as UX pros might label stakeholders. And it's not that I don't love you, I do. But you are important to the process and everything. But you know what? Damn it, you can make our lives difficult sometimes. There, I said it. Especially product partners. Again, you might take offense to some of the things I talk about today, but today isn't just about naming the beasts. It's about figuring out how to tame them, how to turn those challenges into opportunities, and to deliver the best outcomes for both the business and the users. So I want to ask you, honestly, I'm going to ask all of us to put our self-aware hat on and see how we might fall into one of these beastly challenges or these categories, okay? Hey, I'm an equal opportunity offender. And if you're a researcher or a content strategist or a designer, and you're guilty of being one of these stakeholder beasts, I want you to own it and fix it, which is what we're going to get into today. Oh, wait, one more thing. Since I'm apologizing, I'm going to say that I'm sorry for the few curse words I'm probably going to be dropping today. I already have a couple, but you know what? Fuck it. We're all adults, so let's just keep it real. So I want to start off with a story. So I was working at a company that owns a bunch of animal hospitals, and I was the only UX designer and researcher. And I just happened to be sitting in a meeting with a product owner who oversaw the mobile products for the company. And he just happened to mention that there's a new doctor app that was going to start development in a couple of days. And I was like, what? What new doctor app? This was the first time I'd ever heard of any doctor app. I was like, oh, okay. What is this? And he said, oh, yeah, it's this mobile app that we're creating where doctors look at the pet information before they step in the room. And I said, oh, okay, cool. What's going into this app? And he listed off this long list of features like medical history, prescriptions, the pet parent address. And I was like, oh, so how do you know the doctors need all of that stuff in a mobile app? And he said, Jen, I just know. Well, when somebody says to me, I just know, my spidey sense goes off a little bit. And that pretty much means they probably have no idea. So I asked for some time to do a little bit of research. Let me talk to a few doctors to find out what is the most vital information that they might need in a mobile app. And he was like, no, Jen, we don't have time for research. Development starts in 2 days. And I was like, okay, well, just give me 2 hours. I'm going to call a handful of doctors and I'm going to confirm that everything that you're putting into that mobile app is exactly what the doctors need. So again, I called the doctors and I talked to a handful of them, and all 5 of them said, all of them said, what do you need to know before you step into a room with a pet patient? They said, I need to know 2 things. What kind of animal is it? Is it a cat, dog, fish? And what am I stepping into? So in other words, the doctor wants to wrap their mind around what they're stepping into. Is this a routine visit like vaccines, no big deal? Or has the pet been hit by a car and it's a trauma situation? And so I was like, okay, that's all you need. And I asked him about the other features that the PO was thinking about putting in there, the pet history, medical history, and communications of the past with the pet parent. And they're like, no, I don't need any of that crap. I can look that up when I go on the computer in the room. I don't need all that information in a mobile app. So my valuable lesson from this experience and to share with you is by just taking a few minutes to do some quick research had huge rewards. We eliminated nearly 75% of the feature bloat that was going to go into that app. And we finished the app 6 weeks earlier, and we finished it way under budget. Now, how do we do that? Because I did research to inform the product direction. Quite frankly, I'm a little bit sick of the bullshit mantra that research takes too long. Ooh. If you're as sick as that, as much as I am, give me a thumbs up emoji reaction. I know I'm not the only one. Yep, there's too many of them there. Woo! I hear you. Okay. So that brings me to my first stakeholder beast, and that is the skimp shark. Now, this stakeholder might do all or some of these things. The skimp shark wants to skip research altogether. They say things like, we don't need to do research. Or they believe they can just look at analytics or data from marketing, and they say that's going to give them all the answers. Or they argue that sales already knows everything about our users and what they need, so there's no point to do any other research. So the skimp shark wants to skip on process and due diligence. And I'm guessing that several of us has had an experience where we've worked with a skimp shark, right? And when they do skimp on things, the outcome is not so great. Maybe you've encountered it too. I don't know. I wish I was the only one, but I suspect I'm not. Like maybe they say, oh, this is for my designer friends here. Oh, we'll just copy what Apple or Amazon is doing. Well, anyone who thinks that all those major companies like that have it all figured out and have run all the proper testing on the things that they release, you have your head in the sand if you believe that. There are tons of major companies that put out poor experiences, and we don't want to copy them. It's frustrating because we know the value of research and not just copying somebody, right? But sometimes getting our stakeholders to see that value can be a challenge in and of itself. All right, so why does this happen? What breeds the skimp shark? And no, we can't blame Shark Week. I don't know if you're familiar with that TV show. I don't even know if that's still on, to be honest, but can't blame Shark Week. This mindset, it comes from a lack of understanding or the value of UX research. Many many stakeholders, they just don't realize that analytics and sales data can be helpful, but they don't provide the complete picture. Research dives into the why behind what a user's behavior is, not just the what. All right, so what can we do to make this better? Well, we can educate our skimp shark with evidence. Remember that doctor app I just told you about? Well, this is my golden ticket whenever anybody doesn't understand the value of UX research. And maybe you can look into your career and come up with a story that's similar, that your research has helped inform design decisions or direction. Even a usability test, think about that. It can illustrate the value of UX research. It can inform your team what works and what doesn't. I once did a test to see which icons best represented a concept. You're looking at it here. I showed participants a set of icons and I asked them, what do they think these mean? Had them define them for me. And woo, did I learn really quickly which of my icons made sense and which ones did not. And therefore, that research, which literally took less than half a day, helped me to pivot my designs in a better direction. Again, this is just another example of how research can be fast and impactful. Now, I want to share an example of when research was not conducted by a major US bank, and it cost that bank hundreds of millions of dollars. And maybe you've heard this story, or maybe you've seen this image. It's a classic. Ooh, look at this interface. Isn't it beautiful? No. Okay, so this is Citibank's interface, which involved a huge transfer. And so here's the situation. A loan transaction needed to be made on behalf of a client. So this is employee facing. Now, take a look here at these options. What they needed to do was the employee needed to know which boxes to check in order to make this banking stuff happen. Doesn't really matter what, but look at the options here on this kind of confusing interface. And so I'm not going to ask out loud, but I just want you to think about it for a minute. What do you think needed to be checked in order to make this transaction happen? Well, I am going to tell you. There were 3 things that needed to be checked: front, fund, and principal. Woo! Who knew? The bottom line is, this is a pretty shitty interface. And I can guarantee it was never tested with employees to see if it made sense. And not testing this product before releasing it into the wild ended up being very costly for Citibank. How costly? $500 million US dollars. Just because an employee did not select all the correct boxes in this, let's face it, poorly designed interface. So lesson here, we don't want to be a Citibank. We don't want to make mistakes like this. And that brings me to my next stakeholder beast, which is speed snake. And there's actually a lot of overlap with the skimp shark here. The speed snake is all about moving fast and often at the expense of thoroughness. You've heard the phrase fail fast, right? Debbie talked about that today. Yep. Oh, or they'll say like, we just need to know if they'll use it, or we'll fix things in version 2. There we go again. The speed snake is all about quick wins and tight deadlines. Now, my favorite example is the stakeholder who rushes to get a product out to market so that we can learn from customers instead of doing some simple testing and iterating first. You know the type. They say, we'll learn from real users and we'll make the updates in that mythical version 2, right? We just need to get this out the door, they say. And I know Debbie's talked about this before, how it can be really dangerous to release an MVP too early. If you release a bad product, it can have huge repercussions on your brand and your reputation. If your MVP creates a poor experience, you might actually lose customers. And you know what? You may never know why you lost them. But if you had done some testing and gotten some feedback before you released it, you would have the opportunity to find out what went wrong, but not if you just release it to the wild. So friends, I want you to remind your stakeholders of the dangers of throwing shit out into the wild to learn from our users. Now think about it. Nobody wants to be a guinea pig in your experiments. All right, so why does this happen? What is the rush? Well, I think this is when we need to put our little empathy hat on, and we need to try to understand why there seems to be such a need for speed. I mean, the speed snake's probably not rushing things out just for fun. And I think the mentality often comes from pressure, either internal pressure or external. So it could be they need to meet tight deadlines from an executive, or they may need to launch a product quickly to stay competitive. Or there is this urgency that drives that desire to move quickly, even if it means cutting corners. And those corners, let's face it, are often user research and testing before release. So what can we do to make this better? Well, we can start by establishing a good UX process. Show timeframes of how things can be done and what happens if UX research is not done. Point out the consequences and how they can be very impactful and not in a good way. One way to do this is to work research into your team's agile cadences. And whether you love or you hate agile, that's for another talk and another time. But you can show, if your team is agile, you can show where research and iterative design can fit ahead of an agile schedule. And this can help ease worries that research and design are putting the rest of the train behind. You get on that agile roadmap. You get them ahead of the current, what is it? I've just lost the word, sprint. There we go, sprint. Sorry about that. So agile research methods, they can provide quick and actionable insights without delaying the project. I mean, look at that that doctor's app I just talked about. Didn't delay the project at all. We also need to set realistic expectations. We should work with stakeholders to set legit timelines that balance the need for speed and thorough understanding. So I have given stakeholders like menus of research options. Like here is a big menu. And by that, it's like a longer research effort. Here is the data we can gather by choosing these methods. Here is the risk we will mitigate and the confidence we could gain from this large menu or medium-sized menu. Less time, less methods, less confidence, or even a small one. Like, okay, don't want to do any research, or you feel like we don't have time. Here's what you'll get in a small time frame. And here is the risk you are assuming through your lack of knowledge, through your lack of user research. And then it's kind of all for you, right? I mean, when I talk about those options, we talk about what could go wrong if we don't learn about this, our users or this product before we release it. What can we mess up? How can we miss the mark? These are the conversations we have when we talk about not doing research to the fullest capacity or potential. And to my UX friends, document the hell out of this. This is not going to fall on you when a product fails. You're going to go, woo, I gave them the option. I showed them the risk we could be assuming by not learning more. And don't make this fall on you. It's really important that UX is not going to get blamed for messing things up because we move too fast. So before I move on to my next stakeholder beast, I have a quick question I want you to think about. And I wonder if anybody, I know Debbie does, but I wonder if anybody has dogs. If anybody has dogs, give me a heart or a thumbs up if anybody has dogs. Okay, cool. And give me a shocked face if your dogs hate squirrels. Mine hate squirrels. There's a few. Yes, mine can't stand it. And when it comes to stakeholders, the scope squirrel is not that animal that's throwing nuts down at your dogs in the yard and laughing at them like squirrels do. This is the scope squirrel. Now, the scope squirrel is a hoarder, collecting all the things. This stakeholder is all about more features, more. Customer service said we need to add a chat bot because they think that it's going to help more people with our service channels. Or sales said we need to add a shopping cart for people to check out our articles, like Amazon has a shopping cart. Or Executive Eric up there in his Eiffel Tower says we need to sprinkle some AI on it, whatever the hell that means. Because everyone else is doing it. And you know what? Sure, these features, they might actually provide some value to the customer. But you know what? They take time to build. A lot of time. So you might hear this as, just do this while you're at it. May have heard that phrase. While we're at it? Okay. Well, think of it this way. When you're at the grocery store or the market the next time, and you drop in a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne into your shopping cart, do you think that will not have much of an impact on the total amount that comes out on your bill when you check out? Oh, yes, it will. You're easily looking at your bill being increased by $200 because you're including it while you're at it. Eee. And we know that feature bloat can be really harmful for a user's experience. It takes time to find things. It adds a bunch of stuff that people don't need. Anybody use Photoshop lately and all these menus? I mean, I kind of wonder how many features are you actually using in Photoshop? I can tell you, mine's a pretty small pool. And this, my friend, is scope creep. All right, so why does this happen? Well, I'll say that scope creep, that the scope squirrels, they're just being a jerk and they want to make our lives miserable. No, I'm joking, really. I think there's actually some legit reasons why this happens. But the one I'm going to focus on is the desire to please others. The scope squirrel wants to add joy and value to the users, to the sales team, executives, marketing, whoever is requesting that feature in the first place. And I get it. We want to provide value, right? But as my husband says to me, when I give him like a huge list of things to do, he says to me, I'm not made of hands. In other words, he can't do all the things because he only has 2 hands. So we might have a finite set of resources and times and tools and people. We simply can't build all the things. And I think sometimes scope creep comes from a desire to please everyone. But when the focus shifts on adding more features, that can actually dilute the user's experience. All that feature bloat can make it really hard on the user. And when a product tries to do everything, it tends to excel at nothing. I want to look at this quote. I really like it. More isn't always better. Sometimes it's just more to manage. Woo! And for users, more to manage means more to learn, more to find, and more to understand. And you know what? These are not necessarily things that users want to do. Remember that story I shared about the doctor app and all the features that the product owner wanted to put into it? All of those features would have made it more difficult to find and do things in the app. All right. I know, friends, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. So what can we do to help contain the scope squirrel? Well, we need to ruthlessly prioritize. And if they can't do it on their own, we're going to step in and help them do it. We can use prioritization frameworks like Moscow. Probably have seen this: must have, should have, could have, won't have. And that will help stakeholders understand what's truly important. And this helps stakeholders focus on the core features that deliver the most value. There's also the impact or value versus effort matrix, right? Maybe you've seen this too. This is really helpful and handy to help people visualize and discuss how important a feature really is, especially when it's compared to how much effort it's going to take to build. And I'm not going to go through all these quadrants, but I think you get the idea that for this quadrant in particular, we should focus on high impact and low effort. And we should prioritize features as the ones that fall into that category, for the most return on investment. So we also need to show resources and availability to the scope squirrel, because I don't know they know, like, it takes people to build, right? So roadmaps and realistic timelines can be a great tool to illustrate how things can and cannot actually be done. Like in Agile, if someone dumps some more shit on the plate of your working, right? You tell them, well, yeah, sure, this can be done, but something's got to give, right? And the thing we're working on now has to be stopped. And what are the consequences of shifting priorities like that? Again, we can show the impact of scope creep, what it could have on our users, and bring the conversation back to that customer experience. How, adding too many features can negatively impact that experience. Okay, but my snarky side is going to say, advocating for the user might not always have a strong impact on product owners and executives. Certainly not as much as it would for a UX person, right? And every company and situation will vary on how important the user experience actually is when it comes to, profit, right? But again, another talk, don't have time to dive into that, but you get the picture. All right, I want to talk about this next beast. Are you familiar with dots like this? You've seen these dots when someone's typing you a message and you're waiting for them to finish, but then sometimes the dots stop moving and they're not typing anymore. And you're like, what's going on? Maybe you've experienced this. You're waiting for a message return and then they stop typing. Well, this is a sign of my next stakeholder beast, which is the sloth. Now, the sloth is slow to make decisions. They are slow to give feedback, and they are slow to move a project forward. And they can cause significant delays by being indecisive or unresponsive. And they say things like, oh, I need a little more time to think about this. Or I'll get back to you after I consult with the team. And then they disappear, maybe for weeks. I once had a project where a stakeholder, they went completely dark for over a month. They were stuck in limbo, waiting. We were waiting for his approval. We couldn't move forward without this stakeholder. And then when he finally resurfaced, we had to scramble to get back on track, which coincidentally, the stakeholder had also turned into a scope, or the scope squirrel, and added a whole bunch of more features. Super frustrating. So why does this happen? Why does a sloth exist? Well, I've got some theories. First, Analysis paralysis. Some people just can't handle making a decision. Ooh, I've seen this so many times. Maybe they have too many options, and so they can't decide. So the problem is too much data. Or maybe it's the opposite, which is lack of data. Or maybe they're worried about making the wrong choice, which kind of ties to my next point. They suffer from a lack of confidence. Sometimes they're hesitant to make decisions without buy-in from others. They want to feel more confident that they're making the right call. So they have to double check and triple check before getting back to you with an answer. And then finally, another reason this happens is maybe they're just plain busy. Sometimes a slow sloth is juggling multiple priorities, and they might be a little bit overwhelmed with their workload. They might have a lot going on, and their focus is shifted to the latest dumpster fire. I mean, admit it, we've been there too, where our priorities have had to shift, right? So, what can we do to make this better? Well, I think the best thing is to understand the root cause. For example, if someone has too much data, don't give them more data because it's going to cause them to get analysis paralysis and not be able to move forward. Another thing to consider is maybe they don't actually understand how their actions or lack thereof are acting as a bottleneck for the rest of the team. Communication is key to keeping that slow sloth movement going. Sometimes we need to establish clear timelines, establish deadlines for decisions and approvals at the beginning of the project so there aren't any delays throughout. And I've also found that frequent check-ins have been helpful. You schedule these check-ins to keep the project moving and ensure that the slow sloth remains engaged and responsive. And even if the slow sloth is dragging their feet, staying in touch can help minimize some of that. I mean, this is why we have daily stand-ups in Agile, right? It's so we can point out when people are slacking. When there are delays in the process. So you want to make sure your communication is clear, specific tasks, when they need to be done, and what they are by a date and a time. And also let them know that you're going to check in beforehand to make sure things are on track. And these are classic project management tactics that we should have in our tool belt anyways. So if you're dealing with a slow sloth, some of these proactive time setting tactics can be really, really helpful. And this brings me to my last stakeholder beast, the shit skunk. This kind of is a catch-all for stakeholders, and they have a lot going on. And honestly, this is the most difficult stakeholder to work with. And, having a shit skunk on a project, it really breaks my heart. And sometimes it really tries my patience. So the shit skunk stakeholder thinks they know it all. They criticize your work. They dismiss your research findings. And they often display low UX maturity and understanding. So what is a telltale sign of a shit skunk? Well, they say things like, I am the user. We already know what our users want. Your sample size is too small. We promised this to executives already. Or my favorite, they tell you what research method you should use. Like, just go send out a server or just run an A/B test. Ooh, triggered. Oh, the shit skunk has really strong opinions, and they often push back with their unfounded opinions and lack of knowledge and data to back them up. They have misconceptions about UX, especially research. They probably don't understand the UX process and principles. And you know what? Rather than admit that, they just push back against our expertise. The bottom line is the shit skunk comes from a place, I think, of insecurity and the desire to maintain control. And it is no mistake, friend, that I labeled this stakeholder after the animal that produces the most stink. So let me share with you one of my shit skunk tactics. When they say, I am the user. Have ever heard anybody say this on your team? Yeah, I'm the user. I know what's best. Yeah. Anybody thumbs up? I mean, come on. I know. Yes, there's some, of course. Yes. Our favorite, right? Woo. Okay. This is what you tell them. You know too much to be an average user. You know how the sausage is made. You know too much about what's happening behind the scenes, how our decisions are made, why things are included or not. And you know what? You care about that stuff. In fact, your paycheck is actually tied to those decisions. The average user does not give a shit about any of that. Maybe don't use the word shit, but you make that call. A real user wants to come in, get their task done, and move on to the next thing. So no, my friendly shit skunk, you are not the user. You are a producer of this thing who happens to use it as well. And so what breeds the shit skunk? Well, like I said, I think it comes from a place sometimes of insecurity or that desire to maintain control. And they suffer from a lack of understanding of the value of UX. They highly overestimate their own expertise. Sometimes they have a big ego, let's admit it. And they also might be resistant to change or unwilling to trust the process of UX and research and design. Ooh, I told you that this was my least favorite stakeholder. So, not all is lost. Despite my negative perspective, I do think there is some hope. There are some things that us UX folks can do to tame the shit skunk beast. And I would say the strongest way to win over a shit skunk is to build trust and relationships with them. Work with these stakeholders to help them see you as a partner rather than an enemy at their beck and call. I'm going to admit it's going to take some time, but showing them that you're on the same team and you share the same goals for the project can sometimes soften their resistance. Also, maybe you've heard of the tactic where if people think it's their idea, it's easier to get buy-in. That can work really well with a shit skunk. Now, I will say, taming the shit skunk, it's going to require some persistence. So you need to continue advocating for UX best practices while remaining patient and professional. Maybe don't call them a shit skunk to their face, but don't give up. With patience, you too can break through their resistance. And you know what? If all else fails, play hardball. Kill them with data. It's crucial to share hard data that is not laced with your opinions. When you present user research or metrics or case studies, you do this to back up your recommendations. When you present data and evidence clearly and objectively, I find that stakeholders can't easily dismiss them as your own opinion when you have that data to back it up. So my favorite phrase when showing a shit skunk the error of their ways, to present research, is to say, the data shows. Think about that. Say it out loud in your little world. The data shows, because I really want you to add this to your toolbox. The data shows. Because, friends, it is hard for product owners or other stakeholders or executives to argue with data when their only weapon is their opinion. Woo! Okay, covered a lot. So I want to quickly review all these different challenging stakeholder beasts that we learned about today. The skimp shark is the stakeholder who wants to skimp on process and research. The speed snake is the stakeholder who wants to work fast, make up tough deadlines, and says we'll update it later. The scope squirrel is the stakeholder who wants to plug in more features and let scope creep take control. The sloth is a stakeholder who delays the project. And the shit skunk is the stakeholder who shits all over your progress with low UX maturity and lack of knowledge. All right, so now what? Well, my major takeaway for you in the safari adventure of exploring the product world and these different stakeholder beasts is to recognize the kind of beasts that you're working with. Understand what is motivating their behaviors and their beliefs, and use some of the tactics I shared with you today to tame the beast. And at the very least, by understanding what might be driving the beast, hopefully you can empathize with them. You can build relationships to raise up their UX maturity within them and within your organization. So happy hunting on your next safari. Thank you all. Any questions? Debbie.
Yes, we have one question in the Q&A. Everybody put your questions there if you have any. Zach asks, how do we approach the data shows conversation when the skunk insists they have their own data and doubts yours?
Great. Bring it. Tell them to bring the data. And then we compare the two. I find that if you say, that's fantastic, I am looking forward to seeing that data that you have, they often don't have it. But if they do, you might have to break down how is that data collected and how valid it is. So for example, if that product owner or stakeholder approached the research in a very biased, confirmation bias kind of approach, you take that data with a grain of salt. But I find that often if you just say, bring it, I'm excited to see your data as well, they often don't have it. Or it's all in their head. That's
or
not
it's
data.
a survey that says like, if we built this, would you like that?
Yes, yes. How many times will you use this? Well,
yes. Every day of my life.
Are people good at predicting the future? I have found that they are not, because if they were, they would always buy the correct lottery ticket numbers and all be millionaires. So nope.
Two more questions. JB asks, which animal is the super duper stakeholder, your dream partner?
None. I don't want to work with any of these. Not saying we don't have to, but we do. But these are not necessarily positive attributes of a stakeholder to have. I haven't really explored the positive side of these stakeholder. I don't even think I would call them beasts at that point, but I would have to say, JB, none of the above.
Right. Alicia or Alicia says, can we say the data shows when it's qualitative data from one-on-one interviews with customers?
Absolutely. Data does
That's the
not have
best
to be
data.
quant data. Yeah. Data doesn't have to be quant. I love this classic example where if there is a rug that has a fold in it and people are tripping over this rug as they walk into a room, do you need 1,000 people to trip over that rug before you realize there's a problem with that? No, you can just use one or two. You'll know what the problems are from one or two. So qualitative data is just as valuable, as Debbie says, maybe even more than quant. Because you're understanding the why. You're understanding the why behind what's going on.
We've got a couple more questions coming in. Nadine says, with regards to speed snake stakeholders, any tips on how you go about doing the research when PMs or upper management are not willing to add research on their roadmap but are crammed with time?
How confident that's when you have some discussions about how confident are you moving forward with the decisions you have made in the product or the feature, right? Do you really feel confident And really, what data do they have to back up that confidence? Because it's opinion, right? I mean, it's challenging because every workplace is up to different standards and timeframes and fluidity as far as flexibility, right? To make research happen. I really would be hard pressed to find a specific solution for you, not really knowing what research is done in the past, what data they have to back up their decisions, and what failures have they done in the past because they rolled out the door with things that were not properly tested or researched.
And we've got one more question from your neighbor, Amy, who says, upon joining a new project, would you recommend having a one-on-one meeting with one of these beasts? If so, what things would you make sure you discuss?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely encourage that. Every time I join a project, I have stakeholder interviews to understand like what's important to you, what constraints are you working under, what experience have you had working with other UX folks, what worked well, what didn't work well, and what is driving your decisions. What does success look like? The kind of the typical stakeholder interview questions, right? Really getting to understand, what does success look like? There's an answer right there. Oh, getting it out by the end of the week. Okay, well, you got a speed snake going on, right? And it would probably be more than one conversation. I mean, stakeholders can be more than one of these beasts in a given day, right? Also in a given project. So this is just simply breaking it down, but really understanding like what's driving them, what are their concerns, and what are their deadlines look like, that sort of thing.
And JB is proposing that the good stakeholder is the cool cat. Oh, was I blipping?
Okay,
Sorry.
the cool cat. A little bit,
The
but I got it. The
cool
cool cat.
cat
I
is the
like it.
stakeholder we like. Yes. Sorry, I'm blipping a little bit, everybody. But that wraps up Jen's adventures for now. I'm going to stop the recording. We'll take a little break and then we'll shift to our last presentation of the day with Patricia. So I'll see everybody in, I think it's about 15 minutes or 13. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.